Good evening, everyone. What I am going to talk about is the idea of doing resilience differently, and this is kind of a nice bracket to where we started earlier today with Caroline's talk about resilience. And so I'm going to frame the talk with three key points. One is that climate change is not an energy problem and natural disasters are not natural. The second one is resilience is not the answer. And the third is cultivating the three C's: creativity, critical thinking, courage with young people may be the best thing we can do in order to survive as a species. And it may be more important or as important as cultivating the three R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic, if you've forgotten those. So, first point, climate change is not an energy problem. Natural disasters are not natural. We all know the headlines, we read them every day, we listen to our global leaders talking about these things. For Honduras, climate change is a matter of life and death, the president of the Honduras. Bold climate action is in every national interest of every single country represented at this conference. The time for brinkmanship is over, Ban Ki-moon. We are facing submerged countries, abandoned cities, fields that no longer grow, political disruptions that trigger new conflicts, leaving more floods of desperate people seeking sanctuary in nations that are not their own. Our past president fondly remembered Barack Obama. We have to leave our children more than a world free of terror. We also owe them a planet protected from catastrophe. François Hollande, President of France. And every year the problems are getting worse. We are at the limits. If I may use a strong word, I would say that we are at the limits of suicide. Pope Francis. So we know, and we're all well aware of this, you more than most living in Alberta are aware of the fact that disasters and climate change, particularly disasters in your case, are getting worse, and the consequences of those disasters are being felt. We keep hearing, oh, this is the most historic flood that we've experienced. This is the biggest wildfire we've experienced. As other people have spoken of today, the floods that you experienced, those of you who live in this region, were the biggest and costliest disaster in Canada until we experienced the wildfires in Fort McMurray. And we don't know what the next biggest disaster is, but we do know that there are going to be others, and that their consequences and the impacts of them are growing. Climate change and disasters pose obviously a threat, so I'm not saying that those do not pose a threat, but what I am saying is that we have to start looking at them differently. The costs are increasing, and the costs are increasing both for us as individuals and communities, but globally the costs of these things are increasing. And I'm using my cheat sheet on my phone, unlike anyone else, because it's late in the evening and I have to do that. So there you go, technological. Someone said I looked millennial, but I think that's only from the arm down. So, this is the landscape in which we're operating. And the challenge I think that we're facing is that to focus on climate change as an energy problem or disasters as natural occurring events, acts of God, whatever you will, is like looking through a window and not looking beyond the glass. It's like treating the symptoms of an illness without understanding and addressing the underlying issues, the underlying disease that is causing those symptoms. So I'm thinking that we have to get beyond sort of looking at the glass of the magnifying lens to looking at what's underneath that glass, what it exposes. Climate change and disasters are like a magnifying glass, and we heard in the first talk this evening after dinner from Jim about this inequity that happens in disasters and how some people in disasters are actually making money, and many people are suffering in many ways, and in ways that are disproportional to their situation in life, and countries that are experiencing disproportional impacts of climate change. So we know, if we look underneath the lens of disasters, that what we're seeing are these underlying issues, a worldview and a world system and institutions that are contributing to and creating the problems of climate change, and in many ways creating the problems of disasters. This is things like global capitalism. We continue to support, even in the face of economic crises, the idea that we still need to consume. We build products with planned obsolescence, disposable products to carry on and keep that consumption going. We look at the environment around us, and we saw an eloquent presentation on the environment in Fort McMurray, but we often look at the environment as a commodity, something for us to use in whatever way we think we need to use it. We are experiencing huge disconnections from ourselves and from each other, and these disconnections are creating inequalities, they're creating poverty, they're creating a lot of suffering. So these are the kinds of things that the lens of climate change and disasters can illuminate if we choose to look beyond the glass and look at what lies underneath those complex problems. These issues that we're talking about today, disasters, and I know we haven't really talked about climate change, but these things are so interconnected now. And as again, an earlier speaker said, we can't say that climate change causes extreme weather, but it amplifies extreme weather. And it is causing shifts in weather patterns that mean that those kinds of disasters that are related to extreme weather events are happening in ways and in places that heretofore they haven't happened. Climate change and disasters challenge us to examine the underlying assumptions, the power relations, the values, the worldview that have contributed to this existence that we have today. So this brings me to the next point, which is resilience is not the answer. Now, I'm saying this with all due respect to all the amazing work that we've heard about today and that we know that happens around supporting and understanding resilience. But what we can say about resilience, and I'm going to flip to a definition of resilience. Caroline gave one earlier for those of you who were here, but I'll read this out. Resilience, as we understand it in the context of disasters and climate change, is the ability of a system and its component parts to anticipate, absorb, accommodate, or recover from the effects of a hazardous event in a timely and efficient manner, including through ensuring the preservation, restoration, or improvements of its essential basic structures and functions. So while the discourse of resilience speaks of hope and potentially a little bit of change, it's essentially a conservative discourse that asks us to normalize the status quo, to protect the very institutions and maintain those institutions, and by institutions I mean sort of the rules of the game, to protect those without actually questioning them. So when we think of climate change as a problem about energy, we're not actually addressing the problem. And it's not to say that reducing fuel and fossil fuel consumption isn't really important. It is. We need to do that if we're going to halt the damage and the harm of climate change. And it's not to say that disaster risk reduction isn't also important. We need to be doing that. And again, we've had many examples today in presentations of people doing that. But it's simply not enough. It's not going to address the problem. If we continue to consume energy, if it's not fossil fuel, some other form of energy, to produce what we're producing, to consume what we're consuming, we are going to reiterate and sustain the problems that we are experiencing. So thinking about climate change as an energy problem, natural disasters as natural, and resilience as the answer is, I'm going to argue, something that's not going to work, which brings me to the third point. Cultivating the 3 C's: creativity, critical thinking, and courage may be the most important things we can do for our survival. When I think about these words, and why do I say that? Because I think we know that we can't solve the problems that we have created with the tools that have created them. And I've got this, which is a quote that some of you may know. It's from about 40 years ago. Audre Lorde, a feminist, said almost 40 years ago, "For the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us to temporarily beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change. We simply can't expect those tools to solve the problem." And those tools are the way we think, our worldview, the assumptions and values that underlie the systems that we currently have. We have George Bernard Shaw also saying hundreds of years ago, "Those who cannot change their minds cannot change anything." So at the Resilience by Design Lab, we spend most of our time working on research that engages with young people as partners in the research, looking at how we cultivate a different kind of mindset. And again, Caroline earlier talked about a mindset at the individual level. So we're talking about creating and cultivating a mindset that is, and we've all heard these words as well, that looks at innovation and change making, and that looks at the possibilities of a different vision for the future. So in the Resilience by Design Lab, we work with young people in various ways to explore this different mindset and the skills that support it, because we also don't want to assume that just because you've changed your thinking about something, you have the skills to carry that thinking forward to enact change. Thinking outside the box, innovation, social innovation. And when I look at social innovation, I would say that we're doing some of the same thing that we're doing when we talk about resilience, actually, which is often when we're talking about social innovation, we're really focused a lot on technology. And I'm not saying I love my phone. You know, I'm not saying technology isn't helpful, but technology is fundamentally not the answer to these questions. So when we're working with young people, we're looking at these kinds of things. How do we explore our environment? How are we curious about it? How do we ask good questions? How are we working collaboratively to deepen our analysis, to look from a social justice perspective at these issues, to understand where and why these inequalities happen? We're talking about cultivating reflection. So how do we support people actually questioning the assumptions, their own and the assumptions that we share socially in our institutions, including our educational institutions? How do we question those and challenge the assumptions that are guiding that? How do we create? How do we imagine? How do we do creative problem solving? But how do we imagine different possibilities? In a talk that I gave last year, a couple of years ago, I talked about a neverland mindset. So imagining a different kind of possibility. How do we experiment, take risks? So how do we assess risk but still take risks? And how do we seed? How do we do change in a way that makes a real world difference? So I'm going to argue that it's not about ideas, it's about making ideas happen, making change happen, and doing resilience differently. And I'm sort of starting to think about resilience as transformational resilience. And yes, that's another buzzword, but for me it sort of signals a different way of understanding resilience or resourcefulness or whatever it is that we're going to call it, which is looking at these skills of ignoring convention, believing in yourself, being curious, thinking critically, practicing reflection, rethinking failure and success, as we heard earlier in another presentation, learning from doing, being willing to assess risks but also take them, as I said, showing up and getting things done. So normally at a presentation like this, I would have young people on the stage with me presenting, or I wouldn't be here and they would be presenting. But in their absence, I want to share a short video with you that talks about this need to engage young people in the space of these kinds of conversations, whether it's about resilience at the community level or about what these underlying assumptions and values and worldviews are supporting in terms of how we approach and how we manage, and how we create the profound changes that we need to create in order to truly address climate change and disaster risks. So I'm going to ask Owen to start that video.
Right now we're in Secwepemc Ulu, it's the territory of the Secwepemc people. And right now we're standing near Balancing Rock. My name is Mike McKenzie. I come from Skeechiston. I live here in Secwepemc Ulu. I'm 23 years old and I'm a youth representative. Most importantly though, I live and I breathe the land here and this is my home. It's so important that people understand that what we do to the land, we do to ourselves. If we don't take ourselves seriously, all those quotes that we put up on Facebook, all of those things that we tell each other when they're feeling down, it's not going to matter. It's not going to matter whether we stop bullying people, whether we stop racism, whether we stop wars. It's not going to matter if we don't stop destroying the planet.
We don't know which parts of the map are necessarily going to be underwater, or which parts of the map are going to be, flooded or, ravaged by fires and drought and all of these different issues. The landscape is going to be completely changed. So we're going to be living in a world where we're redrawing the world maps. So we have to be, making sure that we're listening to scientists and making informed decisions with how we go forward. If you're not involving people my age in the decision-making process, you're leaving us with a lot of uncertainty in how we're supposed to go forward. I think that youth are able to sometimes come up with very dramatic and drastic ideas that are more exciting and also more relevant to how serious this problem is. It's a huge deal. It's the biggest problem that I think we're currently facing.
We're seeing students stand up more for climate change, equality issues, First Nations rights, you name it. I think, first of all, youth need to be educated before they can be taken seriously, and I can agree with the government on that perspective. I find that opportunity and education are the two main things that will help push and motivate youth to make change in the world.
Fossil fuel consumption is key to our economies and how we go about living every day. We can think of things in different ways than older generations because we know we're the ones who are going to have to be living through this. We understand that if we don't do something, it's going to have big effects in our lifetime.
As youth, we are the future. In a few years, some of our friends may be running for prime minister or some position of power, so everyone's got to be knowledgeable about all these situations.
We can't be selfish and just be thinking about this generation or this century, because there's going to be generations that go on for as long as we know, and they should be able to have the opportunity to have the same resources and the same drinking water that we have.
We need to be more face-to-face. I feel like this generation has gotten so caught up in looking at their screen that they often miss all of the beautiful stuff around us. So we all have to come together, and I think that we can do it if every person does a little part.
We just can't wait for other people to do it. Like, we have to take action to make sure that just to make sure everything stays the way it is right now.
I think youth perspectives are important because we're the next global leaders, we're the next generation, and this is our planet, and we have to take care of it because this is where we live.
And we should have a say because we're going to be the future.
Uklasish Kelila Rampanen, Histakshix Ahuzaksup, Kutzit MT Hasatuk. My name is Kelila Rampanen. My new channel name is Hasatuk, meaning strong, vibrant voice. Hi, Mr. Suit and Tie. Won't you leave our lands alone? Everything was perfect until you claimed it as your own. Hey, Mr. Suit and Tie, won't you let the waters flow free? Nobody gave you the right to bottle and sell it to me. I like to think that I can just say it out straight and not have to, I don't know, just no consequences, really. Just say what I mean and not be afraid of what will happen. Ain't gonna swallow your fear no more. Ain't gonna buy into greed no more. Ain't gonna follow your lead no more.
washing in all the pain, and tried to cover it up, and yet it still remains. I miss the suit and tie. You got one chance at life, yet you take it for granted. But we all pay the price.
The world is so powerful that it could find a way to adapt, but I think it's good the way it is now, so might as just leave it that way.
Ain't gonna follow your lead no more. Ain't gonna swallow your fear no more. Ain't gonna buy into greed no more. Ain't gonna follow your lead no more. Ain't gonna swallow your fear no more. Ain't gonna buy into greed no more. 'Cause I'm a product of this day and age. Fist in the hair, time to feel my rage. Product of this day and age. Fist in the hair, time to feel my rage. Hey, Mr. Suit and Tie. Hey, Mr. Suit and Tie. Hey, Mr. Suit and Tie. Hey, Mr. Suit and Tie.
In one sense, I think that there are some people who are taking youth very seriously. Personally, I feel that youth are sort of just this box that's being checked in policymaking, and ideas that are coming from youth aren't necessarily really making it to paper. I don't think we're being taken that seriously.
And so the young people, we're at a point where we're just trying to figure out, what is it that we're gonna do, you know? Because we wanna do something. People, they don't realize that we're not complacent, we're not willing to wait, and we understand that if we don't do something today, it's going to affect our children. We've got people who focus and they get sick thinking every single day about these things because they feel the land so deeply and they understand what's going on. And so when I think of disaster, I think of, you got this huge waterway right here, you've got Kamloops Lake, you know, I mean, this lake is already a disaster. What you're looking at is a lake that you cannot legally drink from it. And these disasters, they carry us through life. They teach us lessons. They taught the Indigenous peoples lessons, and it's why the Indigenous peoples do what they do to this day. When it comes to this area, and when it comes to what I believe in, I'm not going to be focusing on those disasters much because I'm focusing on the love and the community that we need to cultivate and grow through these disasters so that they stop happening.
When I first went to my mom's traditional territory in Fort McMurray in Solitar Sands, and I think that's when I realized that it's a thing and it's really scary. Just a couple years ago when I did write the song Higher and Higher, here during the winter it flooded and we had to leave our home, and the river just came up really high, and then during the summer we had a forest fire here, which hasn't happened in a long time, and just seeing those things, it's really scary just to think of this is kind of the starting point of what's going to happen.
And there's going to be things in the world that change and they roll, and they're going to be dramatic, they're going to be frustrating, they're going to be great, they're going to be hard some days, and we got to stand together as communities so that we can be there for each other and that we can work through those ways. Then we have a chance. I believe that we're going to make it. I think that's what we're lacking right now, is leaders that want to step out and be bold, right? I think that's a big thing. But we need those leaders to step up, and if they don't step up, they got to step down. So the young people are getting strong. Look at Idle No More, look at Standing Rock, look at all of it. The only reason any of those things are big is because the young people because we're fed up. And we're not going to take it anymore. I think the biggest thing the governments have to realize is whether or not they want to do it with us. Because at the end of the day, it's going to be done whether they like it or not. But I'm excited. I'm not excited for any little old reason. The only reason I'm excited is because everybody's loving and everybody's talking to each other about these things. And that's all it takes. In 6 years, it'll be normal. In 12 years, it'll be the way things are. And from there, it'll change the world.
Those are young people. There are more than we shared in the video. And I guess my final thought with that is, I truly believe that cultivating the capacities of young people to meet these challenges, cultivating their capacity to dig below that surface, to go below the magnifying glass, and really understand and challenge some of the assumptions, to integrate some of these other worldviews from Indigenous traditional knowledge that look at the interconnectedness and the interdependencies, and work from an ethics of reciprocity. I think that actually doing this is probably the fastest way forward at a time when speed is really, truly of the essence. So thank you so much for sticking with it this late, and congratulations to all the speakers, and I'll hand it back to Tim.